1 Kings, chapter 20. And Ben-hadad, king of Aram, has gathered all his force, and 32 kings are with him, and horse and chariot. And he goes up and lays siege against Samaria, and fights with it, and sends messengers to Ahab, king of Israel, to the city, and says to him, Thus said Ben-hadad, Your silver and your gold are mine, and your wives and your sons, the best, are mine. And the king of Israel answers and says, According to your word, my lord, O king, I am yours, and all that I have. And the messengers turn back and say, Thus spoke Ben-hadad, saying, Surely I sent to you, saying, Your silver and your gold and your wives and your sons you give to me. For if at this time tomorrow I send my servants to you, then they have searched your house and the houses of your servants, and it has been that every desirable thing of your eyes they place in their hand, and have taken them away. And the king of Israel calls to all the elderly of the land and says, Please know and see that this one is seeking evil, for he sent to me for my wives and for my sons and for my silver and for my gold, and I did not withhold from him. And all the elderly and all the people say to him, Do not listen, nor consent. And he says to the messengers of Ben-hadad, Say to my lord the king, All that you sent to your servant for at the first I do, and this thing I am not able to do. And the messengers go and take him back word. And Ben-hadad sends to him and says, Thus the gods do to me, and thus do they add, if the dust of Samaria suffice for handfuls for all the people who are at my feet. And the king of Israel answers and says, Speak, do not let him who is girding on boast himself as him who is loosing his armor. And it comes to pass at the hearing of this word, and he is drinking, he and the kings in the shelters, that he says to his servants, Set yourselves. And they set themselves against the city. And behold, a certain prophet has come near to Ahab, king of Israel, and says, Thus said YHWH, Have you seen all this great multitude? Behold, I am giving it into your hand today, and you have known that I am YHWH. And Ahab says, By whom? And he says, Thus said YHWH, By the young men of the heads of the provinces. And he says, Who directs the battle? And he says, You. And he inspects the young men of the heads of the provinces, and they are 232. And after them he has mustered all the people, all the sons of Israel, 7,000. And they go out at noon, and Ben-hadad is drinking, drunk, in the shelters, he and the kings, the 32 kings helping him. And the young men of the heads of the provinces go out at first, and Ben-hadad sends, and they declare to him, saying, Men have come out of Samaria. And he says, If they have come out for peace, catch them alive, and if they have come out for battle, catch them alive. And these have gone out of the city, the young men of the heads of the provinces, and the force that is after them. And each strikes his man, and Aram flees, and Israel pursues them. And Ben-hadad, king of Aram, escapes on a horse, and the horsemen. And the king of Israel goes out and strikes the horses and the charioteers, and has struck among the Arameans a great striking. And the prophet comes near to the king of Israel and says to him, Go, strengthen yourself, and know and see that which you do. For at the turn of the year the king of Aram is coming up against you. And the servants of the king of Aram said to him, Their gods are the gods of the hills, therefore they were stronger than us, and yet we fight with them in the plain. Are we not stronger than they? And this thing you do, turn aside each of the kings out of his place, and set captains in their stead. And you, number for yourself a force as the force that has fallen from you, and horse for horse, and chariot for chariot. And we fight with them in the plain. Are we not stronger than they? And he listens to their voice and does so. And it comes to pass at the turn of the year that Ben-hadad inspects the Arameans and goes up to Aphek to battle with Israel. And the sons of Israel have been inspected and supported, and go to meet them. And the sons of Israel encamp before them like 2 flocks of goats, and the Arameans have filled the land. And a man of God comes near and speaks to the king of Israel and says, Thus said Yahweh, because that the Arameans have said, Yahweh is God of the hills, but he is not God of the valleys, I have given the whole of this great multitude into your hand, and you have known that I am Yahweh. And they encamp opposite one another for 7 days, and it comes to pass on the 7th day that the battle draws near, and the sons of Israel strike 100,000 footmen of Aram in 1 day. And those left flee to Aphek into the city, and the wall falls on 27 chief men who are left. And Ben-hadad has fled, and comes into the city, into the innermost part. And his servants say to him, Now behold, we have heard that the kings of the house of Israel, that they are kind kings. Please, let us put sackcloth on our loins, and ropes on our heads, and we go out to the king of Israel. It may be he keeps you alive. And they gird sackcloth on their loins, and ropes are on their heads. And they come to Israel and say, Your servant Ben-hadad has said, Please, let me live. And he says, Is he still alive? He is my brother. And the men observe diligently, and hurry, and catch the word from him, and say, Your brother, Ben-hadad. And he says, Go in, bring him. And Ben-hadad comes out to him, and he causes him to come up on the chariot. And he says to him, The cities that my father took from your father, I give back, and you make streets for yourself in Damascus, as my father did in Samaria. And I, with a covenant, send you away. And he makes a covenant with him, and sends him away. And a certain man of the sons of the prophets said to his neighbor by the word of Yahweh, Please strike me. And the man refuses to strike him. And he says to him, Because you have not listened to the voice of Yahweh, behold, you are going from me, and the lion has struck you. And he goes from him, and the lion finds him, and strikes him. And he finds another man and says, Please strike me. And the man strikes him, striking and wounding. And the prophet goes and stands for the king on the way, and disguises himself with ashes on his eyes. And it comes to pass, the king is passing by, that he has cried to the king and says, Your servant went out into the midst of the battle, and behold, a man has turned aside, and brings a man to me and says, Keep this man. If he is at all missing, then your life has been for his life, or you weigh out a talent of silver. And it comes to pass, your servant is working here and there, and he is not. And the king of Israel says to him, Your judgment is right, you have determined it. And he hurries and takes aside the ashes from off his eyes, and the king of Israel discerns him, that he is of the prophets. And he says to him, Thus said Yahweh, Because you have sent away the man I devoted out of your hand, even your life has been for his life, and your people for his people. And the king of Israel goes to his house, sulky and angry, and comes to Samaria.